Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the 12:30 presentation. Glad that you are here to join us. I am Shango Los, your host and host of the Shaping Fire podcast. If you enjoy hearing from the top minds in the cannabis business industry, I encourage you to visit shapingfire.com to enjoy in-depth interviews about cannabis business, health, and technique that will provide you with actionable information without wasting your time. Our YouTube channel also serves about 500,000 minutes every month of exclusive cannabis content. Recent guests have included cultivar Kevin Jodry, the godfather of cannabis terpenes, neurologist Dr. Ethan Russo, geneticist Dr. Reggie Gaudino on cannabis plant patents, and Natasha Riz on using the cannabis root as medicine, and many, many other folks. Please, if you've got a mobile phone on you, and we know you do, please take a moment and put it on vibrate. Also, please note that the feedback sheets on your tables and at the side of the room, Indo Expo would love to have your feedback so they know who to book for future events. Our next speaker is Peter Konjoian. Dr. Konjoian is a private sector researcher and consultant whose career has focused on helping small and mid-sized commercial greenhouse growers operate profitably. His current research focus includes the areas of hydroponics and aquaponics in greenhouse and indoor production settings. Today, Peter's going to talk about conducting your own product trials on site to make more informed production decisions. Please welcome Peter.
Thank you, Shango. I'm heard in the back okay? Good afternoon. Welcome. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about how a grower in his or her operation can reliably, correctly, appropriately conduct product trials in order to make decisions on what products you might want to use in operation, compare side by side, etc. I'm going to ask you to put your seatbelt on, strap yourself in. I've got quite a bit that I want to cover, and if you have questions, raise your hand. I think I'd prefer to get through my presentation and save a little time at the end, just so I can get through the little bit of science. And if you're going to allow me in these 45 minutes, I want to take everybody back at some point to middle school or junior high school for someone my age. We're going to review the scientific method. And if that phrase isn't enough for you to get up and walk out the back door, we're going to have some fun. Why conduct on-site trials? You might say that you're looking to reduce costs, production costs, which would save money. You might say we want to look at crop performance and quality, increase yield, which will raise revenue. It doesn't matter what reason, in the end, we want to make more money. And as a private sector researcher and also a commercial greenhouse operator, after my academic days ended and I returned to the private sector, that's the bottom line, folks. And even though I've spent time on faculty at universities, it's the real world that I really enjoy operating from. Question: have you conducted product trials? Anyone in the audience, have you done this in your operation? And perhaps before I even ask for that show of hands, who's with me today? Do I have growers? You folks, I'm from the outside your industry, so I'm commercial ornamental crops, poinsettias, geraniums. I'm edible hydroponic vegetable herb crops. So our terminology differs a bit. I say grower, you say cultivator. I say cutting, you say clone. But I think we'll be able to get through the 45 minutes together. So how many growers or cultivators do we have here today? And how many of you are in the state of Colorado? Do I have anyone outside of Colorado? I came from Massachusetts. Where are we from? Oklahoma. All right. Have you conducted product trials? Were you confident with your results? And was a product or practice changed? We don't have time in the 45 minutes for me to welcome you in to answer these questions, but these are the questions I thought we should put on the table for us to think about. Why are we conducting on-site trials? Well, whose claims are you going to trust? And I'm not here to stir any pot or create any trouble, but the manufacturer, the distributor, the sales rep walk in the trade show, there are claims the length of, well, the height of a 14er. Who are we going to trust? I saw a phrase at one booth claiming backed by science, and this statement concerns me. Not so much folks for the booth that is using it. That booth might be based in science and reputable and credible. I'm not criticizing them, but as I walk around your trade show as a traditional horticulturist, used to my own trade shows with greenhouse products and systems, we don't have that phrase. So I asked myself, why is this industry, why did somebody feel like they need to say that? And it may be what's bringing us together in this room. There are so many products, there are so many claims. How are you and I as growers going to sift through that to make a decision of what product to purchase? I went around yesterday through the trade show and counted the number of booths featuring LED lighting. And there are about 7 different manufacturers, perhaps 10 or a dozen at most, booths offering lighting. I went around this morning before the trade show opened and counted fertilizers, biological products, and I lost count after 20. So after describing my world as commercial greenhouse production, commercial horticulture, we don't have a fraction of that many booths offering fertilizers and biological products. So there's a lot of confusion that you as a grower are feeling as you walk around trying to decide what products to buy. All right, question. Where's this group from? We already covered that. Thank you for inviting me today. Good thing it wasn't next week, folks. You wouldn't have me here, being from Andover, Massachusetts. Now, most of you being from Colorado, I tip my cap. Brady and Peyton Manning had battles over their careers, and I compliment you, congratulate you on a couple of years ago with Peyton going out on top. We keep waiting for Brady to decline, but he keeps digging down into the bag of tricks. And, all right, question, what brought us together today? What brings a commercial greenhouse operator researcher like me to your educational program? One of my statements is, or my senses is, cannabis is evolving, ladies and gentlemen, into a mainstream commercial horticulture crop. As a mainstream commercial horticulturist, I welcome fellow growers and new crops, and I predict within 2 or 3 years that at our national greenhouse conferences, we will be offering tracks on cannabis and inviting you folks to join us. Agree or not, in horticulture, my opinion is a plant is a plant is a plant. And I know that some folks in this industry don't like hearing me say that, so I'm going to qualify it a bit. There's perhaps a qualification, the pharmaceutical injection regulations. And during a couple of presentations yesterday that I sat in and attended, I learned a lot. And while the culture and production of cannabis, in my mind, a plant is a plant, it's some of those post-production restrictions and characteristics that do separate it from some of our other crops. But in terms of similarities to what I'm used to working with, the photoperiodism of cannabis and poinsettia are identical. The nutrition of tomato and cannabis are similar. So again, my point, a plant is a plant. If you were here in the previous presentation, one of the speakers used one of her favorite phrases that healthy roots mean healthy plants. I have my own version of that, and as my children brought their grammar school classes to our greenhouse each spring for field trips, my phrase to the youngsters remains, happy roots make happy shoes. And I share that with fellow growers. We're never too old to learn, and some of those phrases are timeless and ageless. An observation: your industry traditionally grows indoors and is expanding into the greenhouse. Mine traditionally grows in the greenhouse and is expanding indoors with vertical farming and locally grown vegetable and food crops. Folks, we have a lot of grower-grower experience to share with one another. I am humbled that you invite me into your world. I would graciously invite you into mine. And being a lifelong grower, I'm one that does not believe in closed shop trade secrets. I believe that together we're stronger, and the more we share, the more time we spend together, the better we become as growers. What is research? What is a trial? If I had more time with you today, we'd get into some detail. What differentiates a research experiment from a trial? For today's purpose, I'm going to say this. It doesn't matter. Either one, executed well, will generate more useful information than the other if executed poorly. So my message in this 45 minutes is, how are we going to execute it well? How are we going to run this trial or experiment so that we learn something and have confidence and change a practice or bring on a product because of our experiment, our work? Here's a ground rule. If you write anything down and want to write this slide down, this is it. Be objective. The opening page of a plant physiology textbook from my graduate school days at Ohio State University starts out like this. A good observer doesn't see what he's looking for if it's not there, and does see what he's not looking for if it is. Think about that just for a second. The first part of that, we want to make sure we're not biased. We might have an expectation that a fertilizer is going to generate a certain result, but if it's not there, don't make it up. The second half says, okay, we're going to be a good observer and we master that scientific method. If something unexpected happens, let our eyes see it. Let's understand it and try and figure out why it happened. Question: product categories that require you and I as growers to make decisions. You can walk around your trade show. Lighting source, we mentioned some of the booths. Growing medium, fertilizers, injectors, biological products, irrigation, environmental control, pest control. We go on the list, right? All the inputs that you and I use to produce a crop. And within each one of those categories, there are decisions to be made. There are salesmen coming to you saying, buy my product. And you're the one that's going to make the decision. So how are we going to test some of these things? Here's a research greenhouse at Ohio State where we're alternating mercury vapor and high pressure sodium lamps to try and even out the spectrum of supplemental light. Now, many of you in indoor production don't have the luxury of this height from the light to the crop canopy. So in this case, with that height, we can spread and even out that spectrum. Here's my research greenhouse in Massachusetts. On the left is a flood and drain experimental system. On the right is a nutrient film channel system that I do most of my vegetable and herb research in. I constructed a growth chamber in one of my warehouses several years ago for a project I was involved in with working with LED light technology. And this is really exciting and advancing technology, as you're all aware. We are looking at tailored spectrum and adjustable intensity, and all of that put together, for me as a researcher, I'm looking to use this technology to reproduce sunlight. Or the question I'm asking as a scientist is, does this technology give us enough power to reproduce the sun. All right? Once we do that, if the answer is yes, we can reproduce sunlight with intensity over the course of the day, dynamic spectrum as the day progresses, then I believe we can optimize it. So if we can reproduce it reliably, then I think that final step is to make it even better. In order to do that, this is an aerial of my greenhouse range outside of Boston. This house is where I conduct most of my research. This is the warehouse with that growth chamber, and I think you can put together what I'm trying to do. What's exciting for me is to be indoors, conducting research, 100 feet away from the greenhouse, conducting the same research, so that we can learn how we're going to manipulate, maximize, optimize either of the environments. Shift gears, and I like to put some pictures in so that it's not all bullet point slides for you. This is a commercial greenhouse installation of Dosatron injectors for fertilizer injection, nutrition control. And you can see with the 5 injectors, different size injectors, we've got tailored nutrition opportunities, selective flow, delivery. That's pretty flexible. And there are systems more automated than that pictured. I don't have enough time to show them. I've got all kinds of pictures from my travels. And then I'm going to drop down to low-tech, flexible manual operation. This is a picture of one of my greenhouses, my propagation greenhouse, where taking the same concept that we want flexibility, we want control, and let me just walk through what we're doing here in this irrigation setup. I've got clear municipal water coming in. I've got acid-treated water for mist system and seed germination and cutting, rooting. And then I've got my central my central fertilizer injector that's supplying, in this case I'm still talking about 200 parts per million nitrogen rather than EC. And then if it's a little dark, but can you see this Dosatron on the floor? That's on a 5-gallon bucket with a different solution. So depending on how I valve this, and it's not automated, they're not solenoids, it's by hand. So you don't believe somebody that says it has to be automated. You can still do it by hand. So I can select clear water. I can select simply the acidified clear water. I can, before I go there, if I want a light fertilizer solution, I would take clear water valve, run it through that Dosatron, pick up 100 parts per million. If I want my standard 200 part per million nitrogen, I select that one, and down below there's a bypass to the Dosatron. So you bypass it and 200. If I decide that I've got a very hungry crop, then I can go ahead and take the 200, pass it through the second injector, pick up another 100 and have 300. All right? So there's all kinds of flexibility that you and I can install in our greenhouse, and it doesn't have to be computer controlled. Here's a project I'm working on with MIT called Open Ag, and we happen to be working with the Ferrero company. You're familiar with the chocolate-covered hazelnut in the gold foil, Ferrero Rocher. Well, they came to MIT in the Open Ag project wanting us to build them controlled environment growth chambers so that they can mimic climate anywhere on the planet and test hazelnut cultivars rather than plant them for 10 years and need to wait in that native environment. So my backyard has a high tunnel with 500 hazelnut trees in it, and my role in the project is to maintain the trees in a commercial environment, prep them for the research that we're doing, and then recycle the trees after individual experiments. Next week, we're going to start cold temperature freezing studies on some of these dormant trees. The reason I put the picture up, folks, this could easily be me setting up a growing medium trial, right? I could have 5 different bags, 5 different types of growing mixes that I'm going to test. There's a slow-release fertilizer. You can see some of the prills mixed in. This could as easily have been a slow-release fertilizer trial where each tub of soil had a different rate. Why conduct on-site trials? We've talked about some of these. Performance in your conditions, side-by-side product comparisons, confirm product claims, see it for yourself. Other reasons. There are a number of reasons that we're going to justify doing product trials. Who paid attention in school? We mentioned this earlier. The scientific method, 6 steps. And again, if we had time, I would quiz you and welcome you in to fill out the steps. Make an observation. Ask a question. Form a hypothesis. All right. Make an observation. Climate is changing. Ask a question. Is it man-made? Form a hypothesis. Is the burning of fossil fuels contributing to climate change? Right? The scientific method. Then, design, conduct an experiment. Analyze, interpret the data, draw a conclusion. It's all very logical. My pleasure to take you back to middle school. Experiment design. Let's go through a few of these things very quickly as we wind down. Objective, treatments, design of the trial or experiment. And then after we execute it, we're going to be collecting data, interpreting those data, and documenting it, coming up with conclusions. All right, so the objective. What do you want to learn? Before designing, before doing anything, please think about this. Answer these questions. Write them down. What do you want to learn? It's like Goldilocks. Don't try to learn too much, and try to learn enough so that it's worth the effort. Write it down. You're going to hear me say that over and over again. Please write it down. If it's not by hand in your personal device, your handheld device, record it. An example. Determine which cultivar of red leaf mini romaine lettuce grows best in my production system. So, an objective that's not too big, not too small. This one, can sweet corn, there's my Boston accent, can sweet corn be grown in a controlled environment system? There's a flood and drain bench in my greenhouse from last summer. And by the way, why not? The MIT project took us down to NASA 2 summers ago, spent 2 days with NASA scientists in a workshop. And they told us that the goal is by 2029 or so to land astronauts on Mars. And what blew me away is when they kind of explained to us, the food has to be there on the ground growing before they even land, because we can't afford to send enough food with them for the trip. So all this has to be done robotically before the human even reaches the planet. So when I grew the corn in the greenhouse, people say that doesn't make any sense. I can easily say to them, yeah, but we might have some of our fellow humans on Mars, and they might look for a corn on the cob on July 4th in 2030. Design. Huge difference between me, a researcher, and you, a grower. The researcher can afford to kill plants. The grower cannot. You need to throttle back experiments. So when I set up a scientific study as a researcher, I can bracket my treatments and include enough of them so that I know some plants are going to die or not perform well. And that allows me to create a data set that is very descriptive. As a grower, you can't really do that often because you need to grow that plant and sell it for a profit. So throttle back, but still, that Goldilocks thing, have enough treatments, but not too many. How many? Enough to be meaningful, not so many to be unmanageable. What is a control and why is it important? This is the most important segment of a discussion like this. What is a control plant? Control plant is one that we don't do anything to. And it's the plant that we're going to compare everything else back to. I've spent 20 years researching the growth hormone ethylene on ornamental crops. And the impatiens plant on the screen is a single plant in a 4-inch pot. 24 hours before taking this picture, the entire plant was in full bloom. I drew a string across the middle of the plant, sprayed the right hand half of it with ethylene, and that's a dramatic effect with petal abscission after 24 hours. The control is this side. Here's a nutrient film channel experiment using lettuce as the subject from a project a year ago. And the project involved different chemistries to treat the water to control algae and biofilm and waterborne diseases. So we were looking at different rates, and you can see some effects. But if I hadn't had the control, folks, what are we going to compare these different treatments to? We can only compare one treatment to another, but we have to have that control. If I had a dime for every time a fellow grower called me and said to me, Peter, I used the ethylene spray on my hanging baskets, I'm not sure what I'm seeing, my first question back to that grower on the phone is always, how do the treated plants compare to the controls? And if I had a dime for every time the phone went silent, or the comment was, I just sprayed everything, or I forgot to do that. And I want to make that point that the control plant, if nothing else, leaves this room with you, have a good appreciation for a control. And I'm always one that says you can have fun with horticulture. So we can do all kinds of things. I've got 2 control sections on that plant and 2 treated. All right, with design. This is my flood and drain system, 4 separate benches, reservoirs, 4 separate pumps, each with a timer. That's relatively inexpensive, and I can look at 4 different fertilizers if I choose. I could look at 4 different flood depths and cycle frequencies, but I just want to give you a few ideas on how you go about setting up trials in a commercial operation. This is from an experiment where I was hand watering potted plants with different solutions, and we didn't have enough plants to warrant an injector, and I didn't want to waste time having to flush the line and injector every time I switched the suction tube to a different solution. So in this experiment, I simply used tubs with the final solution strength. Each tub has a pump and a dedicated hand watering hose. So we were able to do 4 different treatments. There's a tub off to the right. Now, just another picture giving you ideas. Many of you have probably or likely set up your own trials similar to this. Seeing someone else's picture oftentimes increases or raises your level of confidence. Here's that nutrient film study again, where each treatment channel has a dedicated 5-gallon reservoir, a small pump inside each, pumping the water up through the tube, and it runs down through the channel. If you've seen nutrient film technique, that's what's happening. So we're just trickling a thin film down the channel, and the plant roots enjoy that environment with all kinds of aeration along with the solution. Again, you can see where 10 different channels, 10 different pumps. There's maybe $300 of material here to set up this trial and design it. Okay, a researcher relies on a small sample set accurately reflecting an entire population. And I stay clear of bringing statistics into a talk like this. So we're just going to dance around it a little bit. We're relying on a few plants as our subjects to represent the rest of our greenhouse. So we need to be really careful about how we're handling and treating those subject plants. Subsets average is everything. Power of 3. If you've heard of it, and randomization. So we don't want to use one plant, a single subject, because something might go wrong with that one plant. And it's too important a decision to rely on just one plant. If we have two, that's better than one. But if we have two plants and they respond differently, which one's right? As soon as we add the third one, magic happens. As soon as there's three, two of them might group themselves to one side, and there might be a third that's an outlier. So now we have a little more, our confidence level rises because we have the two plants reacting similarly. Does that all make sense? So always use at least three. The more the better, but you can't use too much room in the production facility. This is an experiment that I have going today, and you see 3 blocks or 3 different replicants in the picture. In the treatment, this is looking at a pulse treatment of water sanitizer. So we determined in the earlier trial that continuous exposure to the sanitizer was phytotoxic. Remember, all those lettuce plants were smaller than the control. So that told us in the next time, let's try a different tactic. So we're going to look at a pulse, a 30-minute pulse, either daily, every other day, or weekly. So depending on how this is valved, I can send that pulse solution through the appropriate channels. The power of 3, you can see very clearly here, each of those headers has 3 of the tubes. So I have 3 nutrient film channels for each. You can see randomization here, where all of the green are not next to one another. Mix them up, because you might have temperature, hot spot or a cool spot. You might have light differences. So randomization and replication. Is that enough time spent on those things without putting everybody to sleep with statistics? This one, if I could hit everybody over the head over and over again, label it. Unless you have a much better memory than I do and most of your fellow humans, you're not going to remember at the end of a crop cycle what was done months or weeks before. So please write it down, label it. Experimental control, 2 meanings, folks. One we've already covered, that controlled treatment. The second is control of the experiment. If you practice good control, that will be uniformity. If you have poor control, variability. Variability is an enemy when we talk about statistics and trying to draw conclusions. So, number 1, you want experiment-controlled treatment. Number 2, you want to practice or learn how to exercise good experimental control. Poor control introduces experimental error. Are the differences due to the treatment or other factors because of the poor control? Right? So you want to eliminate those other factors of poor control and have a higher level of confidence that your differences are due to the treatments. Example, growing media trial. All right, let's say you're going to sample and try 3 or 4 different growing mixes. Are they all going to be on the same drip zone? If you say yes, that's going to be one big mess of experimental control. Because likely the reason you're trying these different mixes is because they either have different aeration properties, different water holding capacities, different nutritional profiles. And if you're watering them all on the same zone at the same time, one's going to be too wet, one might be too dry. You might end up at the end with some really cool differences and say, that's the best. But then I'll say to you, because of that experimental error that you incorporated, that lack of control, your confidence may not be very high. I'm going to blow through this. What are you going to measure? Right? Once we execute this trial or experiment, we have to collect data. So with this mini pak choy that I'm working with in this slide, it might be fresh weight, You guys are all about bud weight. Many other crops that I work with, plant height, number of branches, number of flowers. What are you going to measure? Write it down. Write everything down. If I've made my point, write it down, label it. Data analysis, what do the numbers mean? Perhaps we can come back next year and we can talk a little bit more about some of those details. Conclusion errors, 2 important points. Saying something's different when it's not. All right, so you run your trial, you're looking at A versus B, and you end up, your trial says A is different than B. All right, product A is better, let's switch. But if it's not really true, we're wasting an opportunity, right? We're going to switch to product A, but it's really no better, so we're wasting our time. The other type of error is saying something's not different when it actually is. All right, product A is the same, don't switch. Well, our trial may not have been designed properly. We might have missed it. We might not have been able to show product A is any better. If that's the case, then we missed out on an opportunity to pick product A because our trial wasn't designed properly. All right, at the conclusion, did you accomplish your objective? Did you raise more questions? Please, don't be frustrated when this happens. Excellent. Good experiments are designed to answer one question and they will raise new ones. Right? That's the scientific process. Learn, learn, learn. Don't ever get tired of learning. Moving forward. I'm going to end with this same observer comment. It deserves a second mention. A good observer doesn't see what he's looking for if it's not there, and does see what he's not looking for if it is. We'll stop there. Shango, are we?
Yeah, we've got about 7 minutes for questions.
Please, comments or questions?
If you have a question, raise your hand and I'll come bring you the microphone. Oh, you know you have a question. I'll get one started, Peter.
Yes, sir.
So when you are setting up these experiments, what kind of thought do you need to get into the uniformity of the equipment that you're using, right? Some of the photographs that you had showed, very complex piping systems, but do you need to make sure that everything is the same length, everything has been cleaned the same way? How far do you need to go in your controls in that category?
Nice question, Shango. And it's going to depend on the experiment. So let's say I've described to you some work I'm doing with water treatment, algae control, biologic, microbes, all that stuff. Very important there that we're not contaminating from treatment to treatment. So flushing lines or making sure that dedicated lines are installed for the trial, that's very important. If it's a growing medium study, well, there's not so much concern there about the delivery of the irrigation solution. But let's say that the growing medium study is looking at different biological products, mycorrhizae, other bacteria that might be incorporated into the soil. You could see where on a small scale, if you're mixing in a tub like I showed in the picture, in between or shifting from one product to the next, you don't want to cross-contaminate. That qualifies as experimental error and loss of control. Keep going if I haven't answered.
Oh, you've answered it well, yeah, totally.
Hello. In your time trying to do research in cannabis, what challenges have you find like in state where it's not fully legal, or is it like in that in between? Does have any study have been interrupted, or you have protesters, or what challenge have you encountered by trying to do research with cannabis?
All right. I have not yet attempted to research cannabis. In Massachusetts, we just had recreational pass legislation a year or so ago. If anyone can help me understand how I get a research, whatever, a license, or that's what I'm waiting for. So I've not yet touched the plant.
So this will be our last question.
What research have you done with regards to the spectrum for lighting and terms of yield or any kind of target things you might be looking for?
Good question about spectral composition and LED lighting. Again, not anything with cannabis. Mine has been more with leafy greens, and colleagues of mine at Michigan State University, Purdue University, have published where the spectrum, we may have been making a little bit bigger a deal out of it than we're actually, the data are actually supporting. So I think 3 years ago around the trade show, you saw a lot of single wavelength or spectral control. Today, most of it's white. And we're finding that in a general white LED lamp, we get the red, the blue, and we get a little bit of green. So that's doing well. Some of what we're finding in lettuce production is red leaf lettuce that I showed a picture of, spiking the blue as the crop nears maturity triggers some of the pigmentation so that we can have a deeper colored red leaf. But an excellent question, and I think we've kind of passed, we blew right through that. Everything was about tailored spectrum a few years ago. Today, in a practical application, most of it's white.
Great, we are out of time. Let's put it together for Peter Konjoian.